Hi everyone, it's Kristie here with another video with two scrapbook friends, and today we're going to be making two card projects. I've got the list of materials here and I'll pop that up at the end of the video if you would like to take a screenshot to make this project on your own. The inspiration for today's cards comes from this fantastic die cut that's available from two scrapbook friends. As you can see, it says Vaccinated, which is very appropriate for the times that we're in here. And I wanted to, normally these are made for scrapbook pages, but I thought, how great would it be to make a slimline card out of this bigger die cut? And the great thing, the reason we're going to be able to make two cards today is because when you purchase the die cut, you also get a photo of the die cut, because of course when you get it, all of these pieces are apart and you get to put it together, so they include a photo so that you can see what the final product is supposed to look like. So I was able to take that photo and fussy cut the Vaccinated out of it. So we're actually going to get two cards from purchasing the die cut. So let's get rolling. I'll take you through a few of the other supplies I'm going to be using today. For cardstock, we've got the Neenah Solar White Classic Crest in the 110 pound for our card bases, the 80 pound for some dry embossing, which you'll see in a few minutes. Some smooth black cardstock. You could use any black cardstock, just make sure it's not a textured one because we're going to be embossing on it. So if it has texture, that can make your embossing a little more difficult to do. And then for the red, I'm using the American Crafts Crimson cardstock. And you can get that in a big pack. It is really handy to have that crimson cardstock in a pack. I love that deep red for projects at Christmas time, Valentine's Day. It's a really great standard red to have in your collection. We've got some bling. We've got the Onyx bling from Studio Katya, which we will use to bling up our project. The dye we're using is from Pink Fresh Studio, and if you haven't had a chance to check out their word shadow dyes, it's worth taking a look at. They have a few different sets available. This is the Sending set, which has tons of great words available, like smiles, best, hugs, good, vibes, love, wishes, sending. We're going to use the vibes one today. And I've already cut a couple out, but we'll do some layering with them, which I'll show you as we get rolling here. We're going to use some white pigment ink. There's lots of different kinds of those available. The one that I really like and get good results with is from Hero Art. So it's Hero Hues Unicorn White. We'll use some glue, embossing powder, our regular supplies, our scissors, pokey tools, tweezers, etc. We need all the things, as you know, tape runner, and I'm going to be using the Woot stamp from the Stamp Market birthday add-on set, so this little sentiment here, and we're also going to be using the dotted lattice embossing folder from Tailored Expressions to add a little bit of interest to the background panels on our cards. And the embossing powder to round this out that we'll be using today is white embossing powder, the Superfine Detail from Ranger. So now that we know the products that we've got, we're going to get rolling here on our project. And I'm going to start with all of the steps that I need with the die cut machine. So the first thing we're going to be doing is embossing our panels. And just before we get into that, I'm going to take a moment to show you the sketch of where we're going with these cards today. So if you tuned into one of the other videos, the Miss You card is on this side. You don't need to pay attention to that. So this is what we're going for today. We're going to make one slimline card with the die cut, and then we're going to use the fussy cut photo Vaccinated word to make an A2 card. So basically how these will come together, there'll be a red panel and then a white panel that will have the dry embossing, and then we'll pop up our sentiment and add some bling. So that just gives you a sense of the direction that we're going in for today's projects. So let's get rolling with the dry embossing. First thing we're going to do is dry emboss on the panel for the A2 card. So again, this is the Neenah Classic Crest Solar White 80 pound cardstock. We will set this up in the embossing folder. This one's really easy to line up because you almost have that grid of dots, which is super easy. So what we're gonna do first is set up our die cutting machine. Make sure you're paying attention on the instructions of your die cutting machine for how to set it up for embossing folders. Every machine's a little bit different, and every embossing folder is a little bit different. So you might have to play around with it and see what works for you for the specific embossing folder that you're using. So let's take a look at the results for the panel for our A2 card. And look at that, nice and crisp, some great dimension. You can see here the deboss side, which you could also use if you wanted to. Really great results. So now we're going to do the same thing for our slimline card. So as you can see, the white panel that we're using is bigger than the embossing folder, and that is not a problem. So we're gonna get this set up in our embossing folder, same as last time. Just line up the dots on the grid there. Try not to let it shift around on you. Sometimes it moves a little bit. Not the end of the world. Okay, so we've got that set up there. I'm going to pop this through the die cut and dry embossing machine. I'm using the Sizzix Big Shot. And here's a little fun fact about my Big Shot. I actually won this from two scrapbook friends several years ago. They were the on-site store at a crop hosted by Scrapfest. It was a Crop Fest event in Cambridge, and they did a draw for the Big Shot, and I was the lucky winner. So I've actually had this for several years. It's still going strong. So you can see here that we've got the embossing on just part of our panel, and we really want to carry that through to the end. So what we're going to do is flip it around, and using the top part of the embossing folder, I'm just going to shift the paper around, and I can feel it almost lock right into place when those raised little dots pop in to the indentations on the top part of the embossing folder. So it is locked into place. I'm going to close that up, and I can see that it's perfectly lined up. Now, here is something that you have to pay attention to. I could run it through my machine this way, just like this, but that's going to cause a problem because the embossed design doesn't run right to the end of the folder, and it's going to end up squishing these lovely raised dots that we have. So you have to turn it around, and you can see it's still lined up great there, and run it through that way. And then you will not get any flattening of the embossing that you've already done. So we're going to put that in. We're not going to run it all the way through. We're going to just go as far as we need to. Run it back. And we should now have great embossing throughout the entire panel, and you can't tell where we stopped and started. So don't be afraid to use your traditional embossing folders, or even your stencils for that matter, for dry embossing. They really do work great, and you're gonna get some really good results. So while we have the die cut machine out, I'm gonna get it set up for some metal die cutting. So I'm gonna put in my metal shim. The metal shim, if you don't have one and you struggle sometimes with getting some crisp die cut results, try getting one of the metal shims. It really does make a difference for getting a nice clean cut with your dies. So we're going to use, as I mentioned, from Pink Fresh Studio, the Sending Word dies. And I don't need to cut out the shadow. I've already cut that one out in black. And I've cut two out of the vibes in the crimson cardstock. And I've also stacked up the dot for the eyes. So we're going to cut one more out. I've got an extra piece of the crimson cardstock here. So I'm going to get this set up in the machine and run this through so that we have our third Vibes word die that we can stack. So we get some nice dimension on the card. And I can see that the top of my eye stuck to my plate. So pop that out there. And we've got our word die all set. So I'm going to use my craft pick here. This is from Maker Forte. Great tool. I also have the Tim Holtz craft pick, which I use often. The reason I reached for the Maker Forte one today is you'll see we're going to be using some bling later on, and this end is really helpful for that part of our project. Okay, so we are done with the die cutting. Just gonna get the machine out of the way here so that we've got some more room to work with. And we'll move on to our next pieces of work. So I'm going to bring in the Misty stamping tool because we want to get some embossing done. And as I mentioned, I'm using the birthday add-on set from the Stamp Market. We're going to use the Woot stamp. So I have that set up in my Misty door already. And we're going to get a piece of black cardstock. Put that in the Misty. Hold it down with our magnet. Just make sure the stamp will hit that, and that looks great. So the first thing we're gonna do is hit the black cardstock with our anti-static powder tool. I like to clip my powder bag with, this is just a clip, I think it's from the dollar store. I saw this on a video from Bromero Cards, and it's really nice because it protects your fingers from getting dry from the powder. So you could use a binder clip, bigger clothes peg if you had one, but I find this chip clip is great. I am really treating this well with the powder bag because if you have not embossed on black cardstock before, the embossing powder just loves the black and it wants to stick to everything. So really good treatment of the black cardstock. Now, normally when we're embossing, we would use embossing ink. Since I am embossing in white on black cardstock, I'm actually going to use white pigment ink. So this is the Unicorn White from Hero Arts. And I think if you try this, what you'll see is, you know how sometimes when you're stamping sentiments and they're thin, like thin lines in your sentiments, so you might not get a perfect result, but you don't want to emboss it again because the lines are so thin, it's going to distort the word. Well, if you emboss in white with white pigment ink, the pigment ink stays sticky for a longer time than a dye ink. And it's white, so it's going to fill in those pieces automatically. So you can see I've got an impression there. I'm just going to hit it one more time. This white ink pad is really juicy, but since it's on black, I'm just going to hit it once more. And we've got a nice result there. Now, I forgot to get myself a piece of scrap paper to pop my embossing powder on. So I'm just going to take a piece of my Misty grid paper, get my white superfine detail embossing powder from Ranger, great all-purpose white embossing powder, and we're going to put that on, let it sit for a second, and looks like we got a great result there. So just going to tap this off. Excellent. We'll put the rest of the embossing powder back in our container for the next project and get ready to heat set that. So again, good idea to use the white pigment ink if you are embossing on black cardstock. Just gonna get my heat tool nice and hot. Sorry for the noise. And this doesn't take long to heat set. Really quite fast. But you can see as it gets melted that there's no blank spots because we use that white ink in the first place. So we'll set this aside and let it cool so that we can then dust off this, the powder from the anti-static powder tool. But that will be all set to cut and insert onto our final project. Okay, so now we're going to go back to the die cut here and put this all together. You could use spray glue to put this together if you'd like. I do that sometimes if I'm doing a lot of these at once, but today I'm only doing one, so I'm just gonna grab my liquid glue from Lawn Fawn, and we're gonna put tiny little dots here on the die cut before we stack it. If you haven't stacked your die cuts, it's a really cool way to get some dimension on your card, and it really doesn't take that much more time. Now, some of these dots of glue are pretty big, and I know they're gonna squeeze out and cause me lots of problems as I try to stack the die cuts. So what I'm going to do is turn it over. I've got it hooked in my tweezers here. Turn it over, and I'm just gonna dab it on that piece of scrap paper and lift it up. So now it's more flat, and I'm gonna have less trouble with glue oozing out between my stacked die cuts. So I've stacked 2 already of the Vibes die from that crimson cardstock. I'm gonna pop that one right on the top and just wiggle it around with your fingers until you get the dies, or the die cuts, sorry, lined up. And if you get any glue that's seeping out, no problemo. All you need to do is rub it away with your fingers. You could get your adhesive eraser if you have one of these. I've had this one for probably, I don't know, 11 years or something. It's been around in my craft room for a long time. So they last a long time, and they really do work to get adhesive off of your projects. So definitely worth having one of those handy. So this looks pretty good. It's stacked up nice. I'm just going to grab my tweezers again and put another layer of glue on so that we can get it stacked up onto the black shadow. And again, I'm just gonna dab this excess glue off onto the scrap paper, so just give it a little tap, and it really does help to make sure that you don't get as much glue oozing out. So I'm just gonna pop that down onto the shadow. And the nice thing about liquid glue versus the spray adhesive is with the liquid glue, you get a little bit more playtime just to wiggle things around. What I love about this Lawn Fawn glue in the glue tube is it dries clear. So even though we've got a little tiny bit of glue popping out in a couple of the areas, it's totally fine because it's going to dry clear. I can see there's a little bit inside that E that I'm just going to smooth out with the craft pick, and same here. And that's looking good. So now we need to pop in the dot for the eye. And I'm going to use the other side of this Maker Forte tool. So this is designed to pick up things. It has a bit of a sticky end to it. I do not know the technical term for that, but it's gonna help us get some nice placement for the dot for the eye. So we're gonna put a tiny dot of glue there, and that's a little bit bigger than I would have liked. So I'm actually going to take my tweezers and scrape that off because that is a little too much glue than we were hoping for. So you can see, you know, these things don't have to be perfect. They don't always go the way that we thought they would. So let's try and get a smaller dot of glue there. There we go. That's a little bit better. So I'm going to pick up the dots for the eyes. I did stack these already because I didn't think you guys would want to sit through the pain of me stacking the dots for the eyes, and just wiggle this around a little bit. And again, it looks white as a shadow right now on the red, but it's going to dry clear. So I'm going to let that set up and not fuss with it too much because I don't want to wreck it. Okay, so now we're going to get started with assembling our sentiment on the other card. So we've got the vibes done for the one. We finished the embossing on the black. You can just brush off, you could use a microfiber cloth. I surprisingly don't have one handy right now within reach, so I'm just gonna brush off that powder with my fingers, which works totally fine. And now we're going to bring in our paper trimmer to be able to cut down this sentiment. So all I'm gonna do to make sure I get some nice even spacing around the word is I'm gonna line up the embossing with the guard of my trimmer. So you can see it's lined up right there. We're gonna do exactly the same thing on all three sides. So lining up again with the edge and cut. Do this last side here, and thankfully it lines up pretty much exactly with the metal piece, so that doesn't leave us too much guesswork we have to do. And then our last cut here. Okay, so we're all set with that portion of our sentiment for the slimline card. All right, so the heavy machinery of the Tim Holtz trimmer is away, and now we are set to start assembling. So I'm going to go over dimensions here with you so you can see what we are building. Oh, there's a little bit of a mark there, but that's fine. We're covering up the whole panel, so that will be covered. So we're gonna make a slimline card, as I mentioned. So the full dimensions of the card base, 8.5 inches across, 3.5 inches tall. So when you are making your card base, you just cut 7 inches this way and 8.5 this way and score at 3.5. So again, this card base is the Neenah Classic Crest Solar White 110 pound, great heavyweight cardstock for your card base. I then cut a piece of the American Crafts Crimson cardstock to the exact same dimension as the card front. So this is 8.5 inches by 3.5 inches. And then the panel that we embossed is slightly smaller so that we get that nice hint of a red margin. So the full dimensions, just let me double check here, of that piece are, oh boy, 8 and this is where I wish these things were done in centimeters, because I grew up learning centimeters, not inches, and now I have to do some counting here to see what we have. So it is just shy of 8.5. So it is, what do we have here? 8 and 6 little marks. So you can see that is the size across. So it's just 1/8 of an inch shy of 8.5. And then on the height is, as you can see, is just shy of 3.5. So it's just 1/8 of an inch shorter than 3.5. Sorry, I will get better at these measurements, I promise. So I'm going to use my tape runner to adhere the card together as we get rolling into the final steps here. And you can see I got a little bit of the tape runner off to the side. Totally cool. You just need to fold it in, and that is no problem at all. Okay, so now we're going to line this up. And we've got about 1/8 of an inch border all the way across. And because the slimline card is longer, I actually find these a bit easier to line up than the standard A2 panels. Okay, so we've got that done. Now we'll put some adhesive on the back of the red panel. And now we're all set to adhere this together. So one thing you may have seen on other videos, when you're lining something up right against the the card base. Sometimes because we use heavyweight cardstock for our card bases, it can pop up and it can be hard to get it to stay straight. So what I like to do is bring back my Misty. Oops. Our papers. Actually, I'm just going to take that paper pad out. So we've got the foam insert there. You can leave that or not. It's up to you. But this slimline card fits perfectly in the Misty. And because we have a little bit of a ridge here, I can line up the card panel exactly with the base. And we get a really nice flush panel on our card. So that's a really easy way to line things up if your panel is exactly the size of your card base. So we'll get that out of the way. And now I'm going to do the same thing for the A2 card. So we'll get some adhesive on our dry embossed panel. And we're going to mount that onto the piece of the crimson cardstock. Very quiet. We're trying to line things up. Serious portion of the program. Okay, that looks pretty good. We'll get some adhesive on this panel now. And we're going to put that onto our card base. Okay, that looks great. So we're going to go back to the slimline here as we start to assemble the final pieces of our card. So again, we have this Vaccinated die cut that's going to be the star of the show. And I think what I will do is pop this up using some of the 3M foam tape. So we'll get some of this onto the back of this great die cut so it gets to be showcased on the front of our card. I'm going to cut a couple of other pieces here. Make sure we've got this nice and supported so that as it goes through the mail, it's not going to flatten or get crinkled at all. Oh, that piece fit perfectly. Isn't that satisfying when you're cutting your adhesive and, oh, you get the piece that just fits perfectly there, especially when you haven't measured or when you don't know your inches like me. That is very helpful when we have these happy little accidents that really help our projects versus, you know, having to start over again. Okay, so this looks good to have our supported sentiment die cut. Pop off the release paper here, and I'm going to put a little bit of liquid glue on top of this foam tape just so that I have a little bit of wiggle room when we put this down on our panel because I don't want to have it crooked or anything like that. I'd like to have a little bit of playtime. So just going to pop down some of that liquid glue so that we do have that playtime and we're not totally stuck right at the beginning. So I'm gonna make sure we're getting this piece lined up across the bottom, try and get fairly even space on each side and up at the top. And that looks pretty good. So we'll press this down and let that get set up. And then the next part of this card for the sentiment is the woot that we embossed. So we really want to be celebrating the vaccinations of people that we love. And that's what this card is going to do. So I'm just going to grab my tweezers again. And I want to slide this in. Because we have that dimension on the die cut, I can slide this underneath so that it's a little bit hidden. And we've got some playroom to move it around. These tweezers come in really handy when you want to move things around on your card because it allows you to get your fingers out of the way, which is really great. And I think we are good there. Okay, so we've got that sentiment done. We're just going to let that set up while we finish the sentiment piece for our A2 card. So again, we have the piece that I fussy cut from the photo that comes with the die cut. And we have the word vibes that we got, that we cut from the Pink Fresh Studio sending set of dies. So the first thing we will do is put some liquid glue on the back of this piece that was cut. Let's get that glued up so that we'll set that down. And the liquid glue is nice here because it's going to sink into the little grooves on the embossed panel, which is great. So we're going to get that in the center of the card and hold that down. Again, serious part of the program. Whenever we're pushing something down, we want to be confident that we're getting it straight. And then we're just going to tuck the vibes piece in right at the top here. Just tuck it in right at the end of the check mark of the V, and I'm just going to have it hover over top of the D so it just tucks in there a little bit. So again, we'll use our Lawn Fawn liquid glue. And again, it's okay if a little bit of this glue seeps out because it dries clear. So don't worry about that too much. I mean, you don't want to load it up so that it's going to warp your paper, but don't worry about it too much because you can see, remember, we had white all around the eye and it's clear now. So it is okay. So again, we're going to pop this down just so that it touches the end of the V and then hovers over the top of the D. That's the placement that we are looking for. So I thought this was fun, alliteration, vaccinated vibes. I thought that was cute for that card. So here's where our projects are so far. The only thing I think they're missing is a little bit of bling. And I'm going to use some of the Onyx Black gems from Studio Katya. I love their gems. They have a flat back, which is really great and easy to place your gems. So again, I'm using this tool from Maker Forte. This end is sticky, so you can see how easy it was there to pick up that gem. And we're just gonna randomly place, I think, 5 gems on this one. Just get a mix of the size here. There's a few different sizes in these packs from Studio Katya. I think there's 4 sizes in this one, if I'm not mistaken. So this one really doesn't want to turn around, but there we go. So I think this placement looks pretty good. Yeah, I think maybe flip this one around here. Yeah, I think that's pretty good. So we'll get some glue to pop these down and get them into place. Sometimes this can be difficult with, you need an extra hand, and I think I have a little bit of a clog in my glue. So I'm just going to take a pin that I have handy. I have learned the hard way that, you know, you think you can have a lot of power with your adhesive and you can keep squeezing, And then all of a sudden you have a big blob of glue that you don't know what to do with. So we're going to try and avoid that for this project. So I've got my glue dots down and I'm going to pop the gems on. And again, great way to use this glue because it is going to dry clear and you're not going to see any of it oozing out on any of these pieces. Okay, so we're gonna let that set up and you can see, you probably saw this, I didn't because I wasn't paying attention, that I got some glue right on my die cut. So I'm just gonna wipe that away with my finger and no harm done. I'll just grab a paper towel to wipe my finger off here. Yeah, there we go. No one will ever know. And now we're going to pop some gems on this. I think we'll do 3 gems up here in this area. I think it would be a little distracting if we put some gems on that side. So I'm gonna grab 3 of the gems from our little tray. These trays are great. It's a bead tray. I think this one is from Studio Katja, if I remember correctly. I'm not exactly sure, but you can, Two Scrapbook Friends has them, I think, from a couple different companies. So you can check out on the website for a bead tray and make sure you have one of these handy. It's really helpful to dump some of the sequins or whatever kind of bling you're using. And I think I want a different size sequin for that one. Yeah, I think that looks a little better to have the 3 different ones, 3 different sizes. So just scoot those out of the way, bring back our liquid glue. Now it's flowing super nice. And we can pop down these last gems to finish up our projects. Okay, so here are the finished cards for today. I hope this has given you some ideas of how to use the die cuts from Two Scrapbook Friends. I know they have a lot of them, and sometimes you might be thinking of scrapbook pages that you can make with them, which is great. But don't forget about the uses that they have as cards. I think these cards are really timely for what we're all going through, and I think it's fun for people to get some greetings like this in the mail. So here again is the list of supplies that we used in today's project, and I can't wait to see if you try it, what your cards look like, and if you have any other comments, we would be happy to respond below. Thanks and have a great day.